I haven't talked about this much on the channel, but I love music. It has been and continues to be one of my biggest sources of enjoyment, entertainment, and inspiration. During the 2010s, I started collecting records just because I wanted to have physical copies of these projects that I really enjoyed. Most of these aren't from games, or at least at first they weren't, but now I have quite a few of them. I love collecting stuff like this, and it's really a unique experience taking the soundtrack out of a video game, like that context of it, and giving your full attention for just the music itself. You start to discover new things about it and appreciate smaller details, and sometimes it'll bring back moments of a time and place that stuck with you when you played the game originally. So, that being said, you can imagine I really wanted the Deep Rock Galactic record when it got announced. This soundtrack holds a really special place in my heart, obviously because it fits the game so well and builds that concept and setting. But also, I have a lot of fond memories with friends, and obviously, I use a lot of the soundtrack in my videos, so it means a lot to have that stuff in a physical format. So when Channel 3 put out the pre-order for the DRG vinyl, I got it as soon as it went live. But to my surprise, a few months later, Caleb, one of the co-owners of the label, reached out to me. What followed was a really nice conversation, some planning, and then we did an interview while playing some Deep Rock. We chatted about his history in the industry, details of creating the Deep Rock record, like how the collaboration came to be, picking the best songs for the record, finding the best fit for the artwork, biome-themed colored records, and so much more. The rest of this video will be that interview just edited down to be more of a condensed format. Thank you to Caleb for reaching out and coming on the channel. It means a lot, so I appreciate the offer. All right, let's get into the interview. The first thing I wanted to ask, I did a little bit of research into video game vinyl stuff. Like, I already had some knowledge,
Sure.
but I wanted to ask how you got your start in it.
So I started a different video game vinyl label back in late 2019. No, late 2018, early 2019, called Debug Records, and that was with myself and two other individuals that were local to me who wanted to start a business. I was the only one with really any music production and vinyl knowledge and experience. I had been collecting records since I think 2015, and I slowly got into the world of video game vinyl, just like collecting it for myself in 2016 when another label, I Am 8-Bit, released the soundtrack to Banjo Kazooie from Nintendo 64. So that kind of opened the door to me like collecting video game vinyl. And at that time, there really weren't that many video game vinyl releases out there, just maybe a couple labels doing it. And you would maybe get like, I don't know, one video game soundtrack on vinyl a month from like the collective industry. But over the next few years, a couple more labels came up and started releasing with more frequency. And yeah, around late 2018, I was just like, I know enough about it that I could make a label and release some stuff. And so I did. um so I ran that label with my two friends, Debug Records. That was until maybe mid 2020 when um, my Debug Records partners and I just went separate ways. Nothing. I mean, it's totally amicable. I mean, I'm still friends with those guys to this day. But their goals going into the label was they wanted to learn a couple different things about business, not necessarily about the video game vinyl world. And so they kind of got the knowledge that they needed when it came to like running an e-commerce platform and etc. So from there, I partnered up with another individual in the video game vinyl world to kind of turn Debug Records more or less into my current label, Channel 3 Records. So it's me and one other individual who run Channel 3. And yeah, so we've been doing Channel 3 since mid to late 2020. And yeah, it's been really great. We've gotten some good titles under our belts, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've slowly started to make a little bit of a name for ourselves, which has been pretty cool. And then, of course, Deep Rock, me being a huge fan and playing the game for a couple of years now, it was always like kind of on my target list, and so when we were able to finally, get that acquired and work with the team at Ghost Ship. That was really fun for me, really special.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how that came about. Did you reach out to them?
Yeah, so I first reached out to them in 2020 when it was like right before Debug Records turned into Channel 3 Records. Um, and at the time in the summer of 2020, they said that it's something that they considered, but they weren't really like interested in at the time. So I said, okay, I'll reach out, in a little bit and see if we can work together then. So I let it sit for a little bit, kind of let them be. And I reached out again in the summer of 2021, so about a year later. And I was just like, hey, remember me? I'm Channel 3 Records now. You said, in 2020 you weren't really ready to talk about vinyl, but would you happen to be ready now? And they said, yeah. So we kind of got the ball rolling, started talking about it a little bit, and then they felt, comfortable with me, and like they loved the fact, obviously, that I was familiar with the game. So we got a deal signed, and yeah, the design and production, prepping for release, that takes some time. So we finally got everything ready for the pre-order period. You know, towards the end of this summer in 2022, and then finally launched it out to the world in October.
I feel like video game vinyl would come with a lot more complications than people would think, because sometimes like owners of things are more complex than you'd think. Like I
Yeah.
don't even know I'm assuming like I don't even know if Ghost Ship technically owns the soundtrack or if that's Sophus.
So Ghost Ship does own the soundtrack, and that
Hmm.
is definitely one of the more challenging aspects of video game vinyl production. Is it's not always black and white as to who owns what. Sometimes it can be the composer still retains the rights. Sometimes the video game company owns it, and then it gets really tricky when you're looking to release older things, because the video game industry, all things considered, is really not that old. Things kind of picked up in the mid 80s, and a lot of companies have like gone defunct or been acquired, and then properties have like changed ownership multiple times. So sometimes it's even difficult to really know who owns the rights in general. Like there have been some instances where we've worked with a few different companies, and no one can tell us definitively if they own the rights to a certain soundtrack or not. So it's definitely for older things, it's kind of a mixed bag. Now that we're approaching a little bit more like modern era with um, the video game industry itself has matured. Ownership is now a little bit more straightforward with recent stuff.
Yeah, I saw you guys did Fogs.
Yeah, yeah, that was a
Oh,
blast.
I love that
I'm a
game.
big fan of that game.
The amount you press is obviously a little smaller. And I
Mhm.
was wondering like for like the production process, is there certain parts that are like more difficult than others and end up as like problem spots more often, or like what are the annoyances of production that come along with it?
The I would say that for me, so it's I think it's a little bit different between my business partner and I. Our skill sets are a little bit different. For me, it's just art and design. I have honestly a terrible eye for good art and design. So finding an artist, at least when I'm searching for an artist for a project, I feel a little bit in over my head at times, and I do tend to rely on my business partner for that, because he is just so much better when it comes to just having a vision and finding a way to put his like idea for the vision on into like actual words to communicate with an artist. That's always been challenging for me, and I think in general, I would say most labels would agree that the art can be the most challenging aspect, because there's a lot of options. You can just use key art, just assets from the game, whatever you're releasing, or you can try to hire somebody to create new pieces. But then it's like, well, what style do you want the piece to be? It needs to be something that relates to the game and is identifiable, but at least different enough to where um it doesn't look exactly like just standard key art. Yeah, so that's probably the most difficult part, to be honest, is finding the right fit for the presentation of the vinyl, whether it be deciding to do key art or something else.
Yeah, I saw like for the Deep Rock one you chose Tim Murray.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that was kind of a, I wouldn't say a happy accident, but when I was looking for an artist for Deep Rock, um, I stumbled upon Tim had this older drawing of a scout. It was like a portrait, and it was kind of
Yeah.
this like textured comic booky looking um just thing of the scout. And I was like, that style looks really cool, and I think it kind of fits in with some of the in game like the posters that you see around Memorial Hall. It kind of has that like propaganda um I don't know, vibe to it. I don't know, just like kind of atomic era almost, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I totally see what you're saying.
And so when I reached out to Tim, and it was like, told him who I was, I asked him if he had, much familiarity with Deep Rock. I assumed that he did because, he had just done this piece on his own for fun. And he said, yeah, of course, like, he's a big Deep Rock fan, and he and I have actually played together some too. He was super excited about the possibility of getting to work on it, and just I knew that I wanted the vinyl the presentation overall to be just filled with references to the game,
Hmm.
and conveying that to somebody who's not familiar with the game would have been a huge undertaking.
Oh
So
yeah.
having Tim in our back pocket with all of the knowledge that he has of the game, being a big fan himself, I knew that when I just mentioned, like, I want subtle references to the game kind of scattered about the Abyss bar scene. He just ran with it. I barely had to even call out anything that I wanted, because I mean, that first draft that we got back from him, it was already loaded with just like little nods and subtle things, and I was super happy with it. And I think it's very apparent that he was the right choice for the job.
We could do some Deep Rock related questions. It's kind of fun. Do you have like a favorite class?
Driller by far, bar none.
That
um,
is also my favorite.
yeah, I love Cryo Driller so much. Vampire Cryo build, just
Oh yeah.
spec my drills for damage, and then freeze everything. And when they're frozen, just drill through them. And with the vampire perk, get 5 health per melee kill. Yeah, it's way too fun.
Would they, if they did like another volume, would you consider pressing it?
Yeah, so I mean, the vinyl release that we are doing is some some tracks from Volume One and some tracks from Volume Two, like the digital soundtracks. Um, if I would like to potentially talk to them about doing another vinyl release and including all of the tracks that weren't able to fit onto the 2 LP.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just a few more tracks from Volume One and Volume Two.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, if they did more music, like a Volume Three of the music, I would definitely love to keep the Deep Rock train going, and release another one. I'm just so huge into this game, and love the music, obviously.
Oh
So
yeah. The soundtrack is truly like even like the story behind the people who ended up like
mhm.
making it is just so funny because like all of the pieces coming together is so odd and then it turns out so good, like just unbelievably good.
Well, one of the things I really appreciated about your video, where you kind of did your overview of Volume One and Volume Two soundtrack, was that you picked up on a lot of the similarities or like references that I noticed when I first started listening to it. Like, I mean, you called out right away, like the very first thing from your video is that the opening track is like The Thing from
Yeah.
1982,
Yeah.
and like I had that own thought separately before watching that video, and then just stumbling upon your channel, that video, and like hearing that affirmation of hey, this soundtrack rocks. It's very like 80s cinema horror synthwave inspired. I was like,
Hmm.
yeah, this guy gets it, this guy understands.
Was it mainly just like like with video game stuff, do you reach out most of the time? Like just reach out to companies and then they end up following through kind of deal?
Yeah, that's how it's mostly been for us. There are some video game vinyl labels out there that are larger, have a lot more notoriety, a lot more releases under their belts, have been around longer. And I would wager with labels like that more often than not they get approached as opposed to them doing the approaching. But Channel 3, we're newer. We're kind of in this industry where video game composers and developers, they kind of have their pick of the litter now. There's so many labels out there.
Oh yeah.
So you do have to be not aggressive, but you do have to, like, be constantly reaching out, making yourself known
Hmm.
for any of the things that you may be interested in, because yeah, it's tough out there.
I was gonna ask also, was the deep rock vinyl in general, like, did it get the traction did you get more like than you expected from it? Like, it seemed like it got
it
a lot of eyes.
Yeah, it was a lot more popular than we anticipated, which is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
we So there's two kind of ways to approach production that seem to be pretty prevalent in vinyl industry in general, not just video game vinyl. You can either pre-produce X number of records, and then once it's close to being in hand, you could say, hey public, we're releasing this, we have 1,000 copies, and that's it. So people don't have to wait as long to get the record that they want, but you may be limiting yourself in terms of potential numbers because maybe more than 1,000 people want it. So Deep Rock was our first experience trying to do what we called an open pre-order, where we completed pretty much all aspects of the record except for telling the pressing plant how many we wanted to make. So we got the art done, we got the audio mastered, everything was ready to get and good to go. Finalized our colors with the pressing plant. Just wanted to tell them, like, hey, we're going to give people a month to purchase this. However many we end up selling, we will come back to you and tell you the number. So we were initially anticipating like 1,000 being as like the high end for Deep Rock, but we decided to try this open pre-order method just to see, potentially we can maybe get more. And sure enough, yeah, I mean, it blew up. It did well over 1,000. Now I have to figure out how I'm going to store and pack and ship that many things. But again, good problem to have, not a bad problem. The only downside is it does end up meaning that, with vinyl production timelines being a little bit longer today than they were, 4 years ago, because of the just increasing popularity in general. That means that, people are going to be giving us their money and then they're going to have to wait a little bit. And that's something that, I came into the vinyl world as a customer and a consumer first before I started making records. And I get it. Like, I don't like to give my money away and then have to wait, 8 months for whatever it is I gave my money for to be in my hand. But it felt like the right decision for Deep Rock, and it ended up being the right decision just because had we had just flat out produced 1,000 units and that's it, like, we by far would not have met the demand that the soundtrack ended up receiving. So, and even then,
Was
we've had people reach out to us still. We
Yeah.
usually
Oh, I
get
bet.
a couple emails a day saying like, hey, I missed the Deep Rock pre-order period, is there going to be another opportunity for it? And we decided to intentionally overproduce, so we took our pre-order numbers and then added on, I think 500, 600 on top of what we actually sold. And that way, we've been telling people like, hey, we're going to have, an overstock, and we'll put those up for sale when the final run of records arrives to us.
But was it the colored one that ended up more popular, I would assume?
Oh yeah, by far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a neat color choice too.
I wanted to stray away from the obvious being the class colors. I
Oh yeah,
you know,
true.
I had plenty of time. So, from the time I first reached out in 2020 up until the time we finally got the contract signed in mid to late 2021, I still was always playing with design, and so was my business partner. We were like bouncing ideas off of each other, like, hey, if we end up getting Deep Rock, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And the thing that I kept going back to was, the class colors are obvious. You've got yellow, blue, red, and green. And at first, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a 2 LP with, one record being, half red, half blue, and the other record being half green, half yellow. But the more and more I just kept, visualizing it, and then we started getting into Tim and working with him, starting to piece together the overall art direction. It became a thing where, like, well, that color split didn't really necessarily look good when looking at Tim's art, and we really strive at Channel 3 to present like a very like holistic package. Like, we want everything to look cohesive and nice together. So when we started seeing Tim's art come together, like, the color palettes just it wasn't going to work. It didn't make sense. So that's when I started looking towards either minerals or biomes for inspiration. We talked about maybe like a Crappa variant where it would just be like transparent green with purple splatter, but we ended up settling, obviously on the magma core and the fungus bogs being that, that orange and black and the green record as well.
Yeah, the orange and like green colors also like are like, obviously it was on purpose, but they match Tim's like colors chosen very well too. So that was like
Yeah.
the perfect biomes for it as well. It really lined up really nice. I put a reminder on my phone for the pre-order. I was like, I will get this. So I did it right away, and I'm so glad I got it, because
I low key hoped that you were gonna find out about the record and buy it. Again, I talked about it earlier, but you called out, some of the same like references and similarities that I found in the soundtrack on your music. I don't want to say music video because that sounds like you were rapping and dancing, but you know what I mean. And so I was like, if anybody I think would appreciate this, I hope that SNIS is a vinyl person, and
oh
if
yeah.
not a vinyl person, I was hoping that this would be your gateway into it. Getting Deep Rock acquired and working with Ghost Ship and seeing the way that the release has turned out how it has, both in terms of just like, well, obviously I'm biased, but I think it looks great. But the core Deep Rock fan base has kind of, said the same thing, that they love the way that it looks, that they really think that it suits the Deep Rock style, the universe, everything. It was really like a moment of affirmation for me. Like, yeah, I truly genuinely believe that we were the right label to put this out.
Definitely. Yeah, cuz like it's something different when, like, I mean, obviously, like, most of the time with video games, if you're reaching out to a company, you probably like the game. But
Yeah.
especially for Deep Rock, trying to it is such a community oriented game that making something that the community likes is like extra special.
Yeah,
Like when I
absolutely.
started doing videos and stuff, it's like hearing people in the community be like, "This is great." It's like, yes, like I did it. Oh yeah, I was gonna ask how long the vinyl playtime was, but then yeah, so like, is there like a limit to how many songs? I know kind of that this is the case, but like, how do you know how much to put on a disc?
So yeah, it's being a physical format, there are literal physical limitations, and with vinyl records, you definitely don't want to exceed 22 minutes per side. I'd say like a more safe number is, less than 21 minutes. Um, that being said, we have released stuff that is like 21, like 49 or whatever, and it always turns out fine. It's just you need to know what you're doing when it comes to audio mastering. You need to make sure that your engineer is familiar with the format if you're going to be exceeding 21 minutes, because there's I don't know how technical you're wanting to get, but there's a thing called intergroove distortion, where the more central that you get into a record, the more likely the sound is going to be altered or distorted. So that's why, like, absolutely do not exceed 22 minutes because, when you start pushing into like 23 minutes, it's not going to sound good. So we're roughly, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, we're like around the 19 to 21 minute mark for all four sides, for two records. So that's our playtime for the release.
How'd you pick the tracks that you did?
That was tough.
Yeah.
That was really hard. I knew that I wanted to have a mix of both Volume 1 and Volume 2 tracks.
Hmm.
I think that, and even again, you called it out in your video that, the music in Volume 1 is pretty different from the music in Volume 2.
It really
There
is.
there's a lot, and I wanted to make sure that all of it was captured, both key moments from Volume 1 and Volume 2. So, um, sorry, I just realized I don't think I mined a single thing of Dice Drum. Anyway, so that was a lot of listening and listening and listening, and obviously, like the soundtrack itself, both Volume 1 and Volume 2, it would take up 4 LPs, and we didn't want to. It's not that we didn't want to do that. We just didn't think it was the right decision to come out with like a full 4 LP box set. Um, so I listened to the soundtrack maybe 4 or 5 times, like consecutively, like literally a single sitting. And I kept like a spreadsheet with all the tracks listed, and then I would put like an X by each one per listen. So just however it struck me at the time, so some tracks had 5 X's, some tracks had 2 or 1. And once I kind of got my favorites from the multiple listens over and over, I kind of moved away from the lower number of X's, and I was still over. I still had to cut something like, I don't know, 28 minutes. So
Ooh.
um
Yeah.
it then became a game of just like putting together possible track listings and listening to them in that possible configuration. So it was just a lot of, honestly, just trial and error. And there are still tracks that I would have loved to have included on this, but
Hmm.
were too long, taking up a lot of time. Um, I'm trying to think of just some of the ones that I cut off of the top of my head. So yeah, like a song like Fathomless Tomb. That song, I absolutely positively love that song, but it's
Hmm.
9 minutes.
Yeah.
And if I were to have included that, I would have had to have cut 3 3-minute songs effectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for as much as I love that song, like I don't think that it would have been worth the trade-off of losing, 3 other shorter tracks.
I love this mission type. I was gonna ask, what's your favorite mission type?
This
Yeah.
bar none is my favorite mission type.
Did you see any
Absolutely.
of the bracket results? I did like a.
Yeah, I did.
It was that was brutal. Some people got really mad at me for putting point extraction against on-site refining. It was like rough.
I have some questions for you, if that's fine.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
So you mentioned, we before we set up this video and got this whole thing started, you had mentioned that you collect video game vinyl too, and vinyl in general. And I'm just curious, like, what's your vinyl setup like? What video game vinyl records do you have? Like, I just want to know a little bit more about, like, what your listening setup is, and the things that you spin.
I don't remember the exact name because it's an Audio Technica product, and all their products are 2 letters and 3 numbers.
Is it an LP 120?
I think that's their cheaper one.
LP 60, I think, is the one.
Oh yeah,
anyway,
it's a 120.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's like the de facto standard. That was my first turntable, and yeah, I mean that you absolutely cannot go wrong with that.
Yeah, I love that thing. My speakers, not good. I don't know what they are. There's something that were here and I had them and I was like, might as well just use them. They need
free's
changed.
better.
But yeah, I usually, if I'm not feeling the speakers, I'll just put headphones in. I have like a pair of these, like, they're like those mass drop Sennheisers that were
the HD6 XXs.
Yeah, something like that.
Yep, I've got those too.
They are so nice. It's been quite a long time since I looked, but like some of my first video game ones, I mean, Undertale was one that I had to
Mhm,
get.
mhm,
Outer Wilds was a more recent one because I,
mhm.
I love that soundtrack. Um, Obviously, I said Grindstone was a recent one as well. Is it hard to sell vinyl?
Uh, yes and no.
Yeah, it depends on how you want to do it, kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'm very much, existing in this niche within a niche, right? So video game vinyl is like another like stratosphere of, I don't know, just like it's very much hyper focusing the hobby, right? So, on one hand, we'll get people who, just like video games who stumble upon us and will buy stuff. And then we get people who just like music who know that, hey, this soundtrack is really good. I'll buy it. Um, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Yeah, it's very much just yes and no. Um, at this point, the uh, the video game vinyl industry is honestly, I think, a little bit saturated. There are a lot of labels out there, so it's hard in the sense of trying to differentiate yourself, not just in terms of like what titles you're releasing, but what your overall records and packages look like. So the approach that we've done with channel 3, which seems to be working for us, is we're very much focusing on this like uber premium aspect. So everything that we release, it's going to be upgraded weight of the paper stock of the jacket, is going to be upgraded weight of the vinyl record itself. We are always putting premium finishes, things like like shiny foil, or spot gloss with UV ink, or some premium finish that you don't see on every single jacket. And then on top of that too, we're always focusing on including something fun with every record. With the deep rock records, we've got those silicone beer coasters that we're doing.
Yeah.
We took the logos and worked with a production facility to make actual silicone beer coasters. And we didn't want paper coasters because you put a drink on it, it gets wet, and then the paper peels off, and suddenly you just got to think of wet paper.
Yeah.
So with silicone, we're able to, like, you can throw them in the dishwasher if you want to clean them, and there's we're making 8 total, 4 with each package, or 4 with each vinyl color.
Hmm.
So that's something that we've been doing to differentiate ourselves. Is there are plenty of video game vinyl labels out there, and soundtracks to spend your money on. The way that we're going about trying to capture um, you know sales, more or less, is we are very much focusing on being upscale.
Hmm.
So um that has been working well for us, and I think that's something that we definitely want to continue to do. And both my business partner and I, coming into running this label, we were both just vinyl collectors first before we ran labels or had any interest in running a label. So that was something that we both always loved. When before we got started on a label, is you'd buy a record, and then you didn't realize that, oh, the paperweight on this is very heavy. It just feels nice. Or you didn't realize that it came with this extra included thing. Or that was something that we definitely wanted to focus on. Is like, we wanted to make the end product as good as possible, which does come at the detriment of, we're wanting to release these very premium things, but we're also wanting to still price competitively, despite the fact that we're doing premium finishes and some other labels aren't. So that does come at the detriment of, we're not profiting as much. Our margins are smaller because we're spending more money to release these premium things, but we're not pricing too much higher than other releases that don't have these premium things. But I mean, then again, like, the label is not my day job. It's not my business partner's day job. This is something that we just kind of started for fun,
Hmm.
and we're kind of just doing what we want. And what we want to do is we want to make really cool things that people can appreciate.
Yeah.
Even outside of just the music. If the music's good, people will buy it. But um, if everything is good about it, then you'll get even more people happy and satisfied with it.
Oh, you also mentioned like you mentioned that you had the Deep Rock soundtrack mixed for the vinyl. What is like, is there certain things you have to know while mixing specifically for vinyl?
Yeah, there are different levels that you need to monitor and adjust. Like unfortunately, you can't have a ton of bass, because you could literally, if you're
Like
doing something
dig through
super
the
bass
whole thing,
heavy,
right?
like Daft Punk or whatever, it'll just literally bounce the needle out of the groove if there's too much bass. So there are. That's not to say that vinyl is gonna sound flat. I mean, there are definitely ways that you can adjust everything so that you're still getting the same like relative punch of the bass, but
Mm-hmm.
you're doing it in a way where it's not going to uh, cause problems with the actual physical playback.
Huh. That's interesting.
The biggest thing with vinyl mastering is you need really really good source audio. So you need like the highest fidelity digital files that you can get,
Mm-hmm.
and that was not a problem with Deep Rock. I mean, they had like incredibly detailed digital files, which were perfect for mastering for vinyl. You probably are familiar, but I don't know if everyone is familiar. But with vinyl, you need to go through a process called test presses, where
Mm-hmm.
you you've got your plant that you're working with. You master the audio, and then you submit it to the plant. So, and to be safe, it's mostly a science, but there can be some like little weird things with mastering audio for vinyl, where you just work with the plant, and instead of pressing all 2,000 3,000 records right away, they press anywhere from like however many you ask, really, but it's usually between 5 to 20 test presses. It's just on plain black vinyl. It comes to you in a white jacket, and with like no art or anything, and you listen to it and you number each copy so you know which one you're listening to, and you're just looking for, okay, does it sound good on vinyl first and foremost, but then also like, are there any issues, like do any tracks have any crackling or um, any issues with playback where it's skipping for some reason. And once you listen to the test presses, you can like effectively determine like, right, there are no issues here, so we can go ahead and press 1,000 2,000 however many thousands of records that you need to press.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps mitigate any large scale issues at the end, because if you either like skip the test press process, or for some whatever reason you don't listen to the test presses and you just approve them, if the final record comes and there's issues with the audio, like maybe a track is out of order, or again something is just sounds bad or wrong, you don't have to deal with the headache of you sent out all these records to customers and it's flawed in some fashion. So
Mm-hmm.
the whole test press process just removes that possibility from happening. So I have all the Deep Rock test presses. They sound fantastic. They were a no-brainer approval. Man, there are some crazy video game soundtracks out there that I would love to make. For some reason, they just don't exist on vinyl already. It kind of blows my mind.
What's one?
Castle Crashers. Basically anything from the Behemoth in general, like Alien Hominid, Castle Crashers, Battle Walk Theater, and Pit People. Like any of those are pretty high up there for me.
And they don't have records?
No.
Huh. That's so odd.
Ghost Ship Games team, if you end up watching this video, and SNIS has gotten his little paper crown, if I make a recommendation, will you make it so the stream suit can have different paint jobs, please?
If you haven't already, go check out Channel 3 Records on their site, CH3 Records. They have a lot of great stuff there right now, and it's apparent how much time and effort they put into making their records something special. I'll also have some links to their socials in the description. I recommend following those as they'll keep updates going for both the Deep Rock record and other records they're going to have coming this year. Yeah, go check them out. They're great people, and they really care about what they're doing. Thanks for watching this longer video. Rock and Stone.